Hello and welcome to the Outer Nowhere
with your hosts Chris Evers
and Paul Sinclair.
So settle down and join us for the next 2 hours of what promises to be an out-of-this-world experience on a radio show which guarantees to take you to the outer limits as we reach for the truth that leaves no proof. Dive deep into the abyss with your hosts Chris Evers and Paul Sinclair right now as we broadcast on the Paranormal UK radio network.
Paul Sinclair is a full-time researcher and the respected author of the highly successful Truth Proof books. Paul's books will open your mind to previously unheard cases, bringing the world of the outer nowhere a little closer to our own reality.
And Chris Evers is no stranger to the world of the strange, producing one of the best online UFO-related magazines in the world. The Outer Limits magazine is the flagship production of its type, bringing new and exciting information in a world of misinformation.
So join us tonight for 2 hours of mind-opening conversation, thought-provoking questions and hard-hitting truths.
Right, today's guest on the Outer Nowhere is documentary filmmaker Chris Turner. Some of you may know him because he's noted for Don't Mention the Reptilians, and quite an interesting film. Welcome, Chris.
Oh, thanks very much, Paul. It's very nice to be here. It's as I said, it's great to be able to talk about the weird and wonderful things in Britain. A lot of this is the strange, often comes over from America, doesn't it? So we have got quite a collection of weird and wonderful things over in Britain as well. So yeah, I'm so glad that you've asked me to be on.
It's our pleasure, Chris. Absolutely.
It certainly is, and you're, as I've said, you're noted for this film, and you're making other films, which we'll probably touch on later on as we're chatting. But what got you into this particular one? Don't Mention the Reptilians.
Well, I think it came from years previous to the Reptilian stuff. I had worked with David Icke. I'd done a couple of documentaries and a couple of interviews with David, and in every single interview, we would reach that point where the reptilians came up. And these documentaries were really about Orwellian type things. We were talking about a big brother and that sort of stuff. So when David would bring up the reptilians, I could never use it. So I had hours and hours of this footage and these interviews with David where I just couldn't possibly introduce this material into, what was considered an alternative, sort of media documentary, and this is about what's going on, what's really going on, the corruption behind all that.
Yeah. And
it came to a point where, I saw the growth of people talking about the reptilian stuff on the internet and in forums, which I was a member of a lot of forums. That was becoming more popular. And it was still ridiculed at that point, but I thought it was a really interesting angle to look at this. And of course I was aware I'd done some work on the 2012 prophecy, and a lot of that talked about the serpent gods in Mesoamerica. So I had some knowledge of the gods being serpent-like in certain parts of South America.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was a good time to sort of do it. No one else is doing it. It was quite a taboo subject. I guess that's the best. I'm rambling here. I guess, but that's the best way to look at this. It was deemed such a taboo subject that I thought someone's got to do something about it. So I did.
Chris, you're right about it being a taboo subject, but you took the bull by the horns and took it on. And do you think that the actual documentary probably were a little bit before its time? It's probably more acceptable now than it was when you first started researching and doing this.
Well, people have said that, to be honest, Paul. They have said that, but at the same time, there are certain expectations when you touch upon a documentary like that, because there's a lot of negative information in there. And there are certain things that I didn't want to touch, and we won't dwell on those, sort of like the satanic sort of those areas that David Icke delves into, and a lot of these negative entities, the reptilians being one of them, not all of them, but some of them, they're involved in a lot of black magic and these practices. So there was a lot of stuff that I couldn't talk about. And when I went public and, I did a YouTube channel and I talked about what I was going to put in the film, I would get emails every day talking about, why are you not talking about this, that and the other? And as a filmmaker, it's very difficult to try and please everybody. So that was coming into sort of ufology. It was one of those things I had to get over. I had to get past. One, I had to get past getting abused on a regular basis on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, because you're trying to. You know, you get a lot of and I guess you know these, Chris and Paul, you know these guys. There's a lot of hardcore ufologists out there that only want to talk about certain things and certainly don't want to talk about taboo things like the reptilians. And yeah, so it's a difficult area, and I only realised, much like Elusive, which we'll talk about soon, it's a very difficult area to talk about. And it is that taboo that some people don't want to talk about it, hence the title, which was a mix of David Icke's The Biggest Secret and a famous interview by, I can't remember the guy's name, sorry about that. I can't. Anyway, it was a merger of two well-known what would you call them?
Investigators, researchers.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the guy. He's an American guy, famous ufologist. I can't think of his name now. Alex. I can't get that surname.
It will come to you. Did you at any point ever feel threatened or feel oppressed whilst making this documentary?
Well, a lot of people said and claimed that I would be receiving a lot of negative attention, and I didn't. It would have been easy to sensationalise it all and say that I did, but no, I didn't. I had one thing happen when I came back from David Icke's place in the Isle of Wight. I'd got back from doing that interview, and my wife was on holiday, so I turned on the laptop and sat down to check my emails because I'd been away. And as I turned on the laptop and I looked up out of the window, I saw this yellow orb sort of appeared in the room. And at first I thought it was my eyes. It was about the size of a tennis ball. And it sort of appeared for, I don't know, maybe a second at the most. And I was sort of like questioning what I'd just seen then. I thought, is this my eyes?
Yeah.
And then as I rubbed my eyes like you would, and just thought, what's going on here? And then it appeared again. So it wasn't my eyes. And I think whatever that was, I'd never seen anything like that. And that's really the only thing throughout the making of that film that happened to me that was odd.
So what did you think was the message or do you not know when you saw this? Was it just confirmation?
I don't know what it was. I mean, through doing the film and through doing the research, these are the kind of things that people were saying might happen, and you get a lot. Ufology is full of hearsay, isn't it?
Yeah.
About things that will happen and what it means and who it is and what the message is, and often what I learned is you've got to go off how you feel, and that's what I did, and I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel, amazed, and there was absolutely no feeling with that experience whatsoever. It was just strange. But I definitely saw it. I know what I saw.
I think everybody would agree who knows you, Chris, and Chris Evers would agree as well, I hope, that's why you're accepted and liked within this community, shall we call it, because like you said earlier, you touched on, I could have sensationalized this, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I just said what was happening and said it how it is. And I think that's a quality there, Chris, that people pick up from you. And it's a good quality. I mean, I don't know what the orb would have meant. I mean, some people listening to this might be able to tell us or might be able to theorise on it. What are your views, Chris?
Well, my views really are that truth is Chris's truth, and if Chris says that he saw that, then why shouldn't people believe him? At the end of the day, all we are dealing with this subject, whether it is, we've discussed this myself, me and you, Paul, whether or not it is a UFO, whether or not it's a nuts and bolts UFO or it's a white light, as you call ILFs, that is the truth to the individual. People should just accept what he said without diving onto the bandwagon, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so yourself then, Chris, have you, when you was making this movie, besides this experience, what do you believe is the the out-and-out truth of the subject, do you personally believe that reptilians are visiting the planet and have an agenda?
I think, obviously, we're all speculating. I'll say that straight off the bat.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, I think you have to, and this ties into a lot of the research that goes on in the alternative media. If you look back through history, you know, all cultures all around the world talk about the gods coming down. It's an age, you know, we've been talking about this in the alternative media and certainly in ufology for decades and decades, you know, and it's absolutely no coincidence. But what was interesting is that the minute you put the reptilian spin on the gods, as they like to call them, that it suddenly became taboo and unbelievable. Whereas if it was some tall blonde giant, that was somewhat, you know, more acceptable. And that always sort of grated on me. Who made the rules? And certainly where the cultural evidence is concerned, in the ancient text read, you know, that these beings seem to, you know, be real in whatever. Well, real's a difficult word to to define, isn't it? But certainly in this subject.
Are we talking the fallen angels here then?
Well, again, I would say the majority of the emails I received were from America.
Right.
Of course, you know, the fallen angels, there's a lot of Christian, from the Christian faith, that's what a lot of them were saying. And it's possible, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you read those texts, it certainly fits, but at the same time, it's not the only.
An interesting sort of twist on this, and not part of the reptilians, Chris, is that a lot of the people who are quite deeply religious and sort of go to church, I'm not saying anything that nobody doesn't even already know, but they're actually praying and worshipping things, men who've seen visions, men who've seen things from the sky, men who claim to have seen things descending from the sky, and that's all acceptable. That's all good in the sort of belief system that they're in. But you talk about this, Chris talks about UFOs, I talk about UFO-related subjects, and to some people, we may as well have a tinfoil hat on, but it's weird. It's double standards, isn't it, you know?
Well, it is. I think ufology is full of double standards. And, you know, when I came to make Elusive, I soon found that the cryptid culture was absolutely no different. No, you know, it's just the way it is. And I sort of got used to that through making the Reptilian documentary. And I guess what I try to remember is that in the alternative media, as it's been dubbed, which has now become sort of like the alternative mainstream, because it's been infiltrated, in my opinion, I think what we sort of see it as like a black market for the truth, don't we, the alternative media? That's the way I sort of look at it. Yeah. We're trying to deal sort of under the radar and with the truth and only the truth, and that's a really hard thing to do when you're dealing with a subject like, you know, ETs, for example.
Yeah, something as taboo as what you've been working on. Were there any of the people that you interviewed, and you don't have to name names here, Chris, but did any of them, I don't know, for instance, claim that they were part reptilian or had actual interaction with reptilians? And then was there any of those people that you actually 100% believed had this experience?
Yeah, well, a bit like what Chris said about my experience with the orb. I think I believe them and I believe their version of what they saw. And that's all we can ever do.
Yeah.
You know, we're stuck with that fact. That's just the way it is. And I guess any sort of, any investigator, any journalist, any researcher is always, you know, in that position where you have to make a judgment call, don't you? And there have been people that I did interview people for the Reptilians documentary that I left out. I did the interview and I wasn't comfortable with what they were saying. And I think all I can do, you know, it's a learning curve. I think that's what people forget as well. I mean, don't mention the Reptilians 2 will be coming out probably early next year. But the original was, I think it's 2 years old now, and even then, the stuff that I thought then, I don't think now, and that's somewhat frowned upon, isn't it, in this arena?
I think
can't change your mind.
We spoke about this. Chris Evers has spoke about this as well, and I don't know whether you want to add to it, Chris, because you're right. You can change your mind, but there's so many people with a fixed mindset, and it's a nuts and bolts UFO, and that's the only way it can go, or these dogmen are this, and it's evolving constantly. Everything seems to be evolving. What do you think, Chris?
I think opinions can change. As a researcher or an investigator, if you are presented with information that alters the facts, or the facts as we perceive them around a case, then we should be prepared to alter our opinions of those cases. Just because it doesn't necessarily agree with our view on the subject or our view on the particular case, then that's tough luck. You should change. We should adapt to the relevant information as it comes in. Absolutely agree with that. No doubt whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think we've much choice, to be honest, Chris. I don't think we've much choice. I think what I've always tried to present myself as someone that will do that. I'm quite open. I've always said I know a little bit about a lot of stuff. I'm not one of those guys that knows a great deal about one or two subjects. It's just not. As a filmmaker, you're moving on to the next project, or at least that's what I thought. I mean, sometimes when you do these interviews and you speak to people that don't know about a certain, say, the Reptilians, for example, you realise that all that time you spent making them, you had learned a lot. But it doesn't mean that years down the line when you're making follow-ups to that film that you can't change the perspective that you was coming from at that time. I'm not saying that I have. I'm just saying that I've met people since then that have put a different spin. And I think the truth, whatever that is, I don't know. It's like the truth evolves as well, doesn't it? In a strange sort of way. So
yes, it does. Yeah. We all. I mean, how many people live on the planet? Is it 6, 7, 8 billion, something like that? And we've all got our own truths of various things that we've seen, etc., etc. One of the things I did want to ask you though, Chris, is the idea of reptiles visiting and looking human. I just don't get that. Can you explain that to me? I mean, there may be people listening who do not understand what we mean when we say, you can see their eyes flickering, or you can see changes in them, etc., etc. I can't get that. I can't see that, and I must admit, I've not seen that in any films that I've actually watched. So just please explain that to me.
Yeah, well, I think this is probably a good part to go into the various guises, I guess you could say, that these entities come in. So most people think, the reptilian aliens and they're flying around on spaceships, and yes, that is one version of, I guess, you as the gods descended from the sky. I guess the logical thing to think is that they did arrive in spaceships, because the descriptions certainly depict that.
Yeah.
But for me, all this, and we'll get into that shortly, revolves around DNA harvesting and genetic manipulation. You can look, even if you look at the human race, I guess you could say that that's true there as well.
So I suppose in reality then, you were going into the kind of Zechariah Sitchin kind of phenomena, where he believes that the gods from wherever visited the earth, came here, and they've altered us in some kind of way. Is that the kind of realm that we're going into?
I guess you could say that. I mean, Sitchin is only one guy that, there were guys before Sitchin and different cultures saying that, before Sitchin. And, this, as I said earlier, this has been around a long time, and I think there's too much correlation world over for it to be fiction, in my opinion. Now, like any story, I've no doubt that it's, been exaggerated at times and sensationalized to fit certain agendas or religions or whatever that might be. But as I said, I think James Bartley, who he features in Don't Mention Reptilians, and he's sort of well known in that field, as well as being a very good ufologist as well and well respected. He classes DNA, it's like the currency of the universe. That's the sort of the way that he looks at it, and not just with the reptilians, but with all ET visitation. That's sort of how he has dubbed it. So I think the the ones that are extraterrestrial, these guys that say fly around on the spaceships, to simplify it.
Yeah.
A lot of them talk about the Draconians, or the Alpha Draconians that come from the Alpha Draconis star system, and a particular planet called Thuban. Now, obviously, the origins and of all that's very sketchy, isn't it? And I take a lot of that with a pinch of salt, because it's a merge, if you like, of stories from different cultures, all saying very similar things. And this particular group of the Alpha Draconis, they were allegedly in a number of galactic wars between these races like the Lyrans and the Vegans and Pleiadians. You've probably heard about all the cosmic wars. And again, that's the sort of stuff that I can only at this point in time take with a pinch of salt, because that does indeed sound very sci-fi, doesn't it?
It certainly does, yeah.
I would agree.
I mean, that's why I've sort of, I'd like to look into it if I could get a very good source for it. And I know that I can back it up with certain ancient texts, and I could probably, kind of semi-substantiate some of it, and at least make people have a look at it. But that's a large body of work to do on top of what I've already got to do. So as I said, there's a lot to talk about just in the ET phenomena, and the fact that these certain reptilians are being sort of left out of the equation for the most part, until people like Barbara Bartholic came into the equation. And a lot of the time you hear about people like Bud Hopkins, don't you?
Yeah.
And who's the other guys? David Jacobs and John Mack. You hear about those guys, but you don't necessarily hear a lot about Barbara Bartholic, who did a lot of work, particularly coming across these reptilian encounters.
Yeah.
And James Bartley was sort of was under her mentorship, along with a lady called Carla Turner. They looked very deep into the reptilian agenda and the reptilian abductions, which was often to all of this sort of, everybody talks about the greys, it's the greys, and what people like Barbara Bartholic were sort of uncovering was that behind these multiple screen memories of greys and then various other screen memories, when she was able to get beneath those screen memories, it was often there were these reptilian beings that were featuring in these abductions.
Right.
And nobody was willing to talk about it. A lot of the ufologists at that time didn't want to talk about it. As I say, it was very taboo back then, even a couple of decades ago. They just didn't want to talk about it. And then Carla Turner, a lady, went public and with her encounters, her family's encounters, and she's written a few books about the subjects. And she's well known in the reptilian field. And as it happens, unfortunately, she was killed. She had a number of warnings to stop lecturing about her encounters, and she was murdered shortly after, just ignoring those warnings, allegedly. So James Bartley continues to do that work to this day, along with Eve Logan. They're still looking into that stuff.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris, is the general outcome of an alleged abduction by the reptilians compared to what we hear about, with the greys?
Well, as far as I can tell, I don't think there's that much difference, if I'm honest, because with the reptilian abductions, often the reptilian might just be present, and the greys are, so as James Bartley said in a couple of interviews I've done with him, the greys are often just dog's bodies, aren't they? They're sort of, they do the heavy lifting in these operations. They're just used. Well, what are these? Semi-biological sort of entities, aren't they?
Almost robotic.
Yeah. Just programmed life forms, essentially, that sort of do the abducting and do the experimentation and do all the dirty work. Now, if you listen to Simon Parkes and what Simon Parkes has received a lot of negative press of late about, but I don't think he's any different than anyone else in this field. We've all had our negative press. So again, you take this information off these guys, for what it's worth, don't you? You do your own investigation thereafter. But he thinks that you don't get a reptilian visitation unless you're very significant. But I don't really buy into that, if I'm honest. I think if you're having abduction experiences, there's obviously something about you. And I think, again, it comes back down to this DNA thing.
Yeah.
DNA and soul energy, that's what sort of a lot of James Bartley's work and Barbara Bartholet's work at the time was about, how these beings, particularly the reptilian beings, were, I guess you could say any negative being, these guys were harvesting the energy of these abductees. Now, how that works exactly in the abductions, I'm not sure. Whether there's a difference between the hosting, which we can talk about shortly, the continual hosting of humans. And I guess, Chris, that's probably what you were talking about when people talk about the eyes changing to vertical slits and all that, because there's a lot of different layers to this that take a lot of time to explain, and some of them do get quite confusing for people, even for me, especially when you're looking at all this in one spot. So the other group of reptilians which people talk about, which is a documentary in itself, is the Inner Earth. Now, I know you guys have heard of the Inner Earth, and that there's various races that are alleged to live in this Inner Earth, and how that came about, according to Simon Parkes and other researchers, is that when the asteroid and the extinction event, is the Chucklacube asteroid that caused the extinction, this particular race of beings that had manipulated the DNA of these dinosaurs, this race of reptilians went on the ground and then evolved underground, and that's where that story comes from, or at least one ebb of it.
Is it Simon Parkes, Chris, that's telling this story, or does it originate from Simon? Or
no, I think he agrees with that version of it. I think Simon tends to add his own spin on things. I think he dubs it as insider knowledge. Whether it is or whether it isn't is anyone's guess. Only Simon knows that. But for the most part, Simon was really helpful in the film, so I would say that. And he doesn't. He says it as it is. Let's put it that way. He doesn't tend to go around the houses, if you like. Yeah, he's a confident chap, and he'll tell you what he thinks, and that's it.
I've met Simon several times and our lengthy conversations with him, and he certainly speaks absolutely amazingly. He really does. What I struggle with, and this put down for Simon, is the fact that everything he's telling us, and I suppose I do it with the things I'm looking into, we can't actually prove one little bit of it.
No.
I'm probably just as guilty myself with things I look into, but
I think that's the difference, Paul. I think there is a difference between. I made the mistake of calling Simon a researcher, and he said, "I don't research. I experience." So, that was his sort of angle. I thought, okay, fair enough. But that Inner Earth reptilians and the Inner Earth races of aliens, that's not Simon's at all. I'm not saying that he's the first guy to say that, and I don't think he is either. I think again, it's a cultural. I think that goes along with some of the Hopish beliefs, the cultural beliefs as well. I know they're gods descended from the sky as well, but I'm sure that they have serpent gods that came from within the earth somewhere in there, because there are various tribes, aren't there, and various beliefs.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and what's interesting about the Inner Earth is that you do have modern day witnesses that have ventured into these cave systems by accident. Cavers, people. I think there's a famous event actually at the Grand Canyon where they went into these caves and witnessed one of these beings, up close and personal. So, they are being seen, and they are still being reported to this day. Now, whether that ties into DUMBs, the deep underground military bases and all that sort of stuff, I guess that could tie into it. I don't know. We don't know, do we? Also, a lot of this, again, not just the reptilian stuff, but the alien stuff as well, is all sort of guesswork and, a lot of research. There's hundreds and hundreds of eyewitnesses and whistleblowers, and the truth's in there, isn't it, somewhere, but only partial truth. I would imagine it's a very small percentage is actually truthful.
Yeah.
which makes making a film like Don't Mention the Reptilians either very hard or very easy, because you can actually say whatever you like, because I don't really have to I'm not under any obligation to substantiate any of what these people are saying. And
your honesty and your take on it, though, that's what I touched on earlier, the way you come across, Chris. We know that you will analyse what the people are telling you and choose not to use it, and as you said earlier, or run with it. Do you know what I mean? I don't think you'd use something just for the sensational side of it, would you? You would always look at something as objectively as you could.
No, you're right. I mean, I think that's all you can do, and I think everybody should be doing that. And if you're not, then you shouldn't be working in this field, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. Actually, very strongly. Actually,
we all know guys that are doing that, and this is probably, I guess we can touch upon I say there's a lot of guys that are doing that, but I'm not one of these guys that says, well, such a body is making a lot of money touring, and he's speaking in America, and he's traveling the world, and he must be making a lot of money. He's on Ancient Aliens, and etc., etc. There seems to be, and I don't know how it's developed, this belief that anyone that is talking about truth shouldn't be making money out of it. They shouldn't be, writing books. They shouldn't be selling products. They shouldn't have any merchandise. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's actually an inversion, isn't it? Because what people are saying is that I'm quite happy to pay for a Sky or a BBC TV license where they'll tell me lies, and I know that they're lying to me. But these guys that are in some cases risking their lives and giving up time with the family, these guys, no, I'm not going to pay those guys. They have to be doing it for free. And this needs to stop, and I think that is, in some respects, why the alternative media hasn't progressed the way it should have. Because if you look back even, I mean, I've been into this, 12 years, but if you look back maybe 20 years, how far has it really come? Obviously, yeah, we've got the internet, but that's now being choked, isn't it? If you go into Google and try and search for UFO cases and alien cases and corruption, all this, it's almost like a modern day burning of the books. Access to that information is being restricted in a big way, particularly in the last year, I would say. There are accounts, YouTube accounts being shut down all over the place, websites being closed down under this fake news legislation, the umbrella of this fake news legislation. And that is a real danger. But yeah, as I say, ultimately, we need to get this information out. My objective was always to try and put a more polished product out there. But that's hard to do when you've no money.
Yeah, I completely understand that, Chris. It's exactly the same with OLM. You want to get something out there that's a little bit different, stands above, not head and shoulders above, but maybe a couple of inches above the rest of the information that's coming out. And it is so hard to get reliable, fully investigated evidence out there to people. And I can imagine it's exactly the same with what you're doing.
It is, because people expect a certain... I guess whenever you label something a documentary, I guess there has to be somewhat of a standard. I mean, YouTube has helped in the sense that there is a lot of low budget stuff out there. So when you do put a semi-polished product out there, it sort of adds credibility somewhat.
Yeah.
Despite it having Reptilian written on it, but so yeah. There is that tiny little thing to get over, but. Yeah, I guess we need to advance things, I think, and I think you're seeing it in a lot of these Patreon accounts. I mean, a lot of people have problems with people having Patreon accounts. I mean, I just don't get it. If someone has a really popular YouTube account and they were getting, hundreds of thousands of hits on their product, on what they were talking about, they had invested all their time researching this information and they're giving it to people, and they're earning a little bit of money through advertisements on YouTube.
Yeah.
Then YouTube come in and choke the algorithms and the views have dropped by 95%. Their income's disappeared. So these guys have no other option than to, if they want to continue that work, to go on Patreon. And people seem to think that people have lost their minds and that they want to pay this guy $1 a month or whatever it might be. And they must be crazy to do that. And I just don't get it. It makes absolutely... I mean, I guess because I'm in that situation. I mean, I don't have any accounts myself, Patreon accounts or anything like that. But I can see why people do it. And I support people that do that. Yeah. I do support a couple of guys on Patreon because I'm interested in what they've got to say. And no one's putting out people's arms up the back. There's a lot of these internet trolls seem to think that these people are twisting their arms up the back and forcing people to watch them, and it's just not true. It's crazy. It makes no sense.
It's not just that, Chris, is it? A lot of the genuine researchers, I say a lot, and I don't know a lot. I know people who allegedly research and sit behind laptop gathering of information and copying and pasting and adjusting it to look like they've done the work. But a lot of genuine researchers invest hours and hours every day. I know you do. I know Chris Evers does every day. And why shouldn't you get some kind of monetary gain for it? I've heard people say, "Well, I've written the book and I don't want to make any money out of it." Well, I have. I've written the book and I want to make some money out of these books. But they're not just a money-making adventure, but they're written and researched, and I want people to buy them. And if end result is I make a bit of money as well, then so be it. I mean, banging on about the books here, so I'm sorry, listeners, but I mean, OLM magazine, in my opinion, Chris should be getting some money for that magazine. In my opinion, Chris Turner should be getting money and some returns for all the time and effort that the people that you visit up and down the length and breadth of this country. Why shouldn't you get it, Chris? I'm with you all the way.
It's not just about money as well, Chris, is it? I mean, obviously you use a camera. Wear and tear on the camera, replacement products. I'm a self-employed photographer, which I do mostly weddings, and it's wear and tear on the equipment. You need to get them serviced every now and again. I mean, I have a couple of Canon cameras that I use, and I do know that to just to send one in to be looked at before it's serviced, and then I'm charged £220 just for sending the camera to them. So things have to be replaced and repaired, things have to be kept up to date, latest software for editing and so on, and it doesn't come free for licenses.
No, you're right, Chris. It's. I think all those things are overlooked, and I think they're easily overlooked by the public. But there's only a certain percentage of people out there that are trolls and that do feel that way. I think, for the most part, if you explain, and I know you've got a conference coming up, haven't you, Chris?
I certainly have.
The conference situation.
About 8 or 9 days away, mate.
Yeah. And it's exactly that. The conference situation is exactly the same thing. When I organised the Repcon conference a couple of years back, you always get that very small percentage of people that have got something negative to say that are branding this a money-making exercise. And as you know, Chris, I lost $2,000 setting that conference up.
Wow.
And I wasn't that bitter about it. I had a great time. And for them, you know what? The people had an amazing time, and they're still talking about how much they enjoyed it now. So for me, it did what I wanted it to do, and if it cost me $2,000, so be it.
Well, tell us about your first conference then, Chris, Repcon. I think that was 2016, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? What was the idea behind it?
Yeah.
Forgive my ignorance, but have you done any more? Are you doing any more?
No, well, as you know, one conference is enough to put you off doing another conference, isn't it?
I'm beginning to wonder at this moment, as I'm preparing my introduction to the conference, what I've let myself in for again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very... And again, it's one of those things that it's a bit like filmmaking. Well, it's similar in the fact that you're committing a hell of a lot of time and money to sort of these endeavours. And now Repcon really came off the back of Don't Mention Reptilians, and the more trailers and teasers that I put out from that film before its release, the more emails I were getting from people talking about a conference. So it just came naturally, really. I just thought, well, let's try it. I mean, it's a very taboo subject. Can I get enough people in one room that want to hear about this? And I only left myself, it was crazy, really. I think I gave myself about 10 weeks before because it was my first conference to get. I think 80 odd people came, which is not a great deal.
Chris, have you ever questioned your sanity doing that in that amount of time? I mean, good Lord, I started about a year before.
No, you're right, mate. I mean, I only learned after. I had no idea that there were so many different events. Oh, actually, there's not a lot of events, but there's people are very, especially British people, aren't they? We're very sort of. We get set in our ways, and we like to do things in a certain fashion, in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that needs to change in the alternative scene. If we want these conferences, everybody I know wants more conferences. So how do we achieve that? And there seems to be a lot of, even within some of these guys that are organising these conferences, they're trying to hinder a conference, interfering with theirs. And I get it; it makes total sense. But surely if people were working together and sort of trying to bring all these people over, and I know that's happening in some places, funding it together, a lot of people funding certain events, that things would go much more smooth, I think. And I think people would be much more likely to attend these events. But Chris, I now realise you've got to give yourself at least 10 months, really.
At least,
so,
yeah.
But I think it's, in hindsight, I would have filled that event in 10 months. There wouldn't have been enough room. Because it was so popular, and people are still now saying, when's the next one? When's the next one? But as you know, Chris, when you bring an international speaker in, we brought James Bartley over from Australia. That's a big chunk of money to bring someone over, and he's not. They've got to stay a week because you can't fly someone on a 24-hour flight to have them for one day.
No, absolutely not. As you're probably aware, we have Mary Rodwell coming over from Australia, and we've also got Colonel Charles Holt coming over from America this year. But I'm actually now already in discussions with 2 people for next year's conference. Possibly 2 from America, and that's all I'm going to say at the moment. But these people who I'm in talks with are currently red hot on the scene. So and they're not going to come cheaply. Absolutely not.
No. So then you've got to take that in mind. I think these things, they are very difficult. I think people underestimate the sort of organisation that goes into these events. And there's a lot of stress involved, I found, because I guess I was trying to do it all on my own, because it was my baby. You know how you get like that? You get a bit possessive.
You get very protective, don't you?
Yeah, it's a bit ridiculous, really, now looking back. Well, and the same can be said, I guess, for the documentaries. You do, and it's probably Paul's, and you're probably similar with the magazine, and Paul's probably similar with his books. You've got this sort of format, and you've got this message that you're trying to get out, and you can get very, there are times when you feel yourself getting steered down the wrong road, if you like. And I've really tried, to stop that happening with the documentaries that I do, because a bit of peer pressure within the movement can sort of, a lot of people were saying to me about Retcom as well, it's going to contain a lot of negative information, you shouldn't really be doing that. I'm thinking, well, if we're not talking about these negative things, I mean, don't get me wrong. When I was making that film, it was 2 years, and I did at times feel very down, because you were looking into very deep, dark places and looking into stuff like satanic abuse and all that kind of stuff. And, looking at that stuff all day is not going to be good for you.
No, absolutely not.
So coming away from, doing the conference was a step away from the computer, and it was a step away from the researching. It was a way of just bringing, but one of the things that came from the conference, Chris, and you'll probably know this yourself, is that during the event and after the event, the people that attend, they're coming up and they've had a fantastic time, and some of these people are experiencers and contactees, abductees, however they like to be labelled, as long as we try not to do that. But they had a fantastic time, and they were thanking me, and so they were over the moon, some of them. So, in that respect, these conferences are well worth doing, and I think it's a really good way of bringing people together and raising awareness. And if get some of your money back. Some of your money back.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the conferences are platforms for the audience who've all probably, like yourself, had experiences and sightings, and it's giving them a place to share these experiences and be amongst like-minded people. And more of them. Before we just leave the reptilians, and we might stay on them, there's one question I want to ask you, Chris.
Sure.
Do you think, I mean, if we're going back to the deeper part of it, do you think they're interested in what we call the human soul?
Yeah, as I said, I touched on it earlier.
You did. I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah. It's no, I think that's a huge part of this. I mean, again, a lot of this. I know you've got Mary Rodwell, Chris, coming over, and I think she'll be talking probably a lot about that, because Mary was in Don't Mention the Reptilians, and she is going to feature in Don't Mention the Reptilians too. And she touches on that, yeah. So a lot of this, like I say, DNA, the currency of the universe, and soul energy and souls, that how it all ties together. There are a number of different theories out there about it. I don't know, but if we jump into what Chris was wanting to know about, was the sort of the reptilians that allegedly host these elite, powerful people, all over the world. The people in politics and media and medicine, you name it. The way that works, I guess, it's not really that much different from other forms of, probably possession is probably the best word to use, because if you look at the jinn from the Middle East, all they were doing is essentially possessing people. That's basically what it is, and it's a bit like the demons in the Christian faith, possessing people. These reptilians are essentially attaching themselves to the human via either DNA, something within the DNA, or something to do with the soul. And there are various ways that they do this. There are, a lot of the time, it's either connected to a person's, blood type or the DNA, and I guess the soul origin, if you like. But other times, a lot of this sort of stuff comes from people abusing drugs. So James Bartley talks a lot about people that are at a low ebb or depressive, that are maybe drugs like meth or heroin. They can get hosted by these negative entities, and it's not necessarily all reptilians. Whatever's down there in that fourth dimension, allegedly, or in the lower realms beyond our sight, it energetically attaches itself to these people and seems to feed off that energy, that negative energy that they're emitting. And whilst these people are in these states of sort of depression, they seem to be somewhat of a beacon, and these entities seem to be able to pick them up somehow. I don't know how that works, but I guess if you
it's
look
an altered state, isn't it? It's just an altered state of emotion, would be my take on it. And obviously they can tap into it. We're probably emitting some kind of different frequency. Maybe frequency isn't the word, but we're in an altered state, and we're able to access another dimension or another sphere of existence just as easy as these other entities, these other existences, can tap into us. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about here, Chris?
I think so, yeah. And I think obviously the reptilians, I see a lot of people talk about these negative entities. One of the words that gets, well, there's a couple of words or a couple of entities that get thrown into this pot is the archons and the jinn, and the reptilians sort of come into that. Those three are sort of, whether they're the same entity, David Icke believes that possibly they are, because these entities take on this form, this reptilian, seem to take on this reptilian form. Not all of them. So yeah, there seems to be some sort of connection to a genetic connection, a DNA, and these people are predisposed to this sort of manipulation via, from this sort of depressive state. Now, I guess, like you said, Paul, it's all energy based, isn't it? If you think that we're all energy, everything is energy. So if we're emitting, it seems to me that when you meet a person, a really excitable person, they'll literally, they'll say, "Oh, I'm buzzing, I'm really excited." That's sort of someone that's in a really positive high energy sort of place, and then there's the opposite end of that scale where you get these people that are really depressed and down, and I guess you could call them heavy. They feel, and I guess that's, you know, a reflection of the vibratory state.
And those moods impress on people that they're around as well, don't they? And we obviously feel it.
Absolutely, and that just goes to, I think that strengthens the argument that this is a very real phenomenon. This sort of certainly the human energy aspect of it, like you say, Paul, because these energy vampires that are out there, you know, there are various scales of how sinister that might be. But if you just look at it on an everyday occurrence, like you might walk into a room where there's been a fight or an argument, you pick up that sort of dense vibration, don't you? That something's not quite right here. And I guess the same can be said, you know, I guess obviously we'll go into the cryptid stuff, but the same can be said about that, about these experiences, about whatever it is, this energy, this realm, this thinning of the veil, whatever it is definitely energy related. And these negative entities, not just the negative ones, seem to have the ability to access and penetrate it at will with certain individuals.
I've wondered at odd times about certain aspects of the abduction phenomena, you know, when people claim to have been floated through walls, or they've seen themselves, you know, like in an operating theatre. That's not necessarily the abduction phenomena, and they said they've seen themselves floating over their body while they've been operated on. And getting back to the soul, I'm thinking to myself, is this what we call the human soul? Are they actually being abducted and taken out of the room in some instances? Or is it the soul that's being moved out of the room, and the witness, when they get these flashbacks, these little cameos of memories, they're perceiving it as their body and their entirety being floated through the wall? And maybe in some instances, and once again, we're only chucking theories around here, it could be just the soul that's been removed. And then
yeah, absolutely, Paul. You're right. I mean, there are a lot of cases of being astrally abducted. Yeah, whatever that means. Again, these things are really hard to sort of accept because I've never experienced any of that. So you can only take it, you know, for what it's worth, and take the person, you know.
It's your
trust
them, Chris.
Sorry.
Chris,
my idea of well, the term archon actually it's from an ancient Greek word, which basically means lord or ruler. So I can see where people are coming from when, obviously, we've discussed the ancient alien theory to some extent, and a little bit of Sitchin and so on. The term archon can refer to that, as they're the lords or the rulers who've come from elsewhere. But the term soul, to me, first of all, I don't view the soul as something that people have. The term soul actually comes from a Greek word, which is psyche, which is the inner self, the innermost self, or your ego, for example. But the term psyche is a translation of an earlier Hebrew word, which is nephesh, into ancient Greek. And nephesh is the act of having the breath of life blown into you at creation. So man became a living soul. He doesn't have a soul that actually leaves the body, etc., etc. That's my definition of the term soul. What do you think of that, Chris?
Yeah, well, my take on it's a bit different, but again, is it my take? I guess my take's been sort of developed from the people that I've met in the last, you know, sort of 10 years, and they tell me that on board some of these crafts, that their consciousness, is probably, maybe that's a better word, Chris. Consciousness, is that the soul?
Yeah, I'd agree with it. Yeah, definitely.
Is being removed from their body and put into, in some cases, ET bodies, and then these bodies are used in certain missions. And I guess this is where the MyLab phenomena comes from. You know, the military abduction side of things. Yeah. That goes hand in hand with ET abduction, because the military want to know what's so special about these individuals. And I think they might have been investigating that decades ago, but I'm damn sure that they now know exactly who these individuals are and what the ETs want with them and what the connection is. Hence why in a lot of these military abductions, sometimes they're working hand in hand with certain races of ETs, the reptilians being one of them in some of the more negative cases. Now, they're not all negative. I will say that, just because, that was brought to my attention by Mary Rodwell when I interviewed her a couple of years ago, and she was talking about how a lot of the bad press sort of takes over in this arena. I guess it does that because we can see from, if this negative reptilian, whatever it is, let's just call it negative for want of a better word.
Okay.
Negative collective of ETs or wherever they're from. When we look at the world today, that's sort of apparent, isn't it? You can see the world's basically in a really, things are getting worse on a daily basis. Civilizations, modern day culture is just dying essentially, and it's being manipulated, and we can see this. So I guess it's easy to say that whoever these guys are must be negative if that's what we're seeing, that's what's being projected. So I find it really difficult when a lot of these new age thinkers keep banging on about how positive and how amazing these positive ETs are, and I get it, I see it, and I understand it, and I certainly believe that that's happening in some cases. However, I think a lot of the abductees that I speak to certainly don't find it very pleasant. They're being taken against their will, they're being experimented. I know all this has been said, but to me, maybe that's just how the way we think about things. Maybe there is a bigger picture, and you always get that, don't you? Oh well, we're doing it for your good, and we're trying to save the planet and all that. I really don't buy into that at all. At the moment, I'm not saying I won't change my mind because I'm quite flexible like that. I'm willing to be convinced.
Same page there with you, Chris. After a sort of lifetime of little bits of interaction with things that I can't explain, and waking up with scars on my body, there's nothing good ever come from these experiences, not for me personally. And I know what you're saying, and I know there's researchers out there that believe most of it is positive. To me, it's all been negative, and I'm not a negative kind of guy. Anyone who knows me outside of this knows I like a laugh, I like a joke, and I enjoy life as much as anybody. But the experiences that I've personally had have been negative with this kind of I don't know what you'd call it. I'm reluctant to call it alien. Just beings. I don't know what you.
Yeah, I think we do get. That's another thing that's happening in this alternative movement. We're getting sort of labelled for giving things a label, if you like, if you know what I mean. You're not allowed to, just because we use a broad terminology for something doesn't mean it's right or it's wrong. It's just an easy way of identifying something. So a lot of people get tied up in fine detail, don't they? But the truth of the matter is we don't know the fine detail. The minute you start looking for the fine detail in regarding alien races, for example, then you're going into very speculative areas, aren't you?
Yeah.
Again, you can make it up as you go along if you choose to. And in my opinion, there are people out there that are doing that. And they're not helping the situation. But at the same time, I think that some of them don't realise what they're doing. And I guess that's what I would say. A lot of these people that come back with these positive messages from the space brothers, well, how do we know? It's like the everyday person that you meet on the street. You've got to take them on their word, haven't you? So I guess that's all they can do. But for these guys that are channeling or alleged to be channeling information from these space brothers, how do we know who he's talking to? How do we know what their intentions are? It's. I just think a lot of people cling on to stuff that they should possibly be a little bit more discerning about.
Yeah, I would agree. Have you any more questions, Mr. Evers?
No, Paul, I'm actually quite fine with what we discussed. Actually, I'm finding it very interesting, to be quite honest with you.
Really?
I don't know if you know, Chris, but this is the reptilian side of things and so on isn't something that I've actually been deeply involved with. So while I'm listening, I'm learning, which I'm very grateful for.
Well, again, Chris, it takes. I think that's the difficulty, and I guess if you let's take David Icke as an example. He's been stuck with that label all his life, and it's very difficult in a 10-minute interview or whatever. You know, you could talk about this stuff for days and on end, can't you? And it's very hard for people to grasp in, especially for someone, a researcher, to get across, I don't know, say years and years of research in 10 minutes. And so I guess that's why people, and not just reptilian stuff, people do it with any subject in the alternative media. In fact, people do it with any subject at all. If it doesn't seem to fit straight away, they chuck it out of it's gone. It's just, some people are just not willing to hear it. There's that sort of cognitive dissonance, isn't there, going on in this movement? A lot of it. I mean, I thought the people in the alternative media were supposed to be the guys that were really aware of the cognitive dissonance. Be self-aware of what's happening and what you're listening to and what you're projecting, and that's just not happening, because I think, and I've done it, I'm still probably doing it subconsciously. You do get protective of the ego does step in, doesn't it? And it sometimes leads you down the wrong. But I think I've always managed to bring myself up. When I found myself doing that, I've managed to bring myself back around and get back on track. And it's natural. It's natural. And if these beings or whatever beings are able to, I guess, interfere, with us in some respect, the way we think, it's possible, isn't it? Anything's possible. I think recently I was listening to an interview on the Cosmic Switchboard, which is James Bartley's show, and he had a guy on his show that worked in a lot of psychiatric wards, and he was talking to a lot of the patients, and they were telling him about these voices that they were hearing, and he put it down to the medication. He just put it down to these guys just being, crazy, essentially. But he learned that after 20 years in this business, he was the guy that sort of made the decision as to whether they were being administered drugs or not. And he found that the guys would rather have the drugs than hear these voices of these beings that they, in some cases, were describing, because it shut the voices down. Now, I guess there's two ways of looking at it, isn't it? But for me, a guy, you've got a guy that spent 20 years studying this stuff with a PhD, sort of saying there's more to this. I wonder if someone like John Mack, as he looked into the abduction phenomena, did that long study and came to that conclusion that it's a real phenomena. I wonder if someone should do, something like that into the, in the psychiatric field.
Yeah.
And look at that. That would be a really interesting study. I dare say that it is being done, if I'm honest. I think somebody, or either collectively, is doing that at the moment.
I have wondered, Chris, myself, if sometimes some of these voices that people claim to hear are real, and not just some kind of strange, faulty bit of wiring in a person's head, for want of a better word, and they are actually hearing some outside external voice within their own heads.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. Yeah.
These poor people have been perceived as being crazy, and in some instances they might not be.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think, but again, it's how to. Can you imagine trying to legislate that, and how do we? Well, I mean, it would mean a bit like do now in America.
We'd end up being admitted ourselves, wouldn't we?
Sure. Exactly.
And
I've already got my room waiting.
a lot of the time as well, with these experiences, we don't actually. It's so far above what we actually understand that we don't even know how to explain it. We've not got the words to explain it. We've not got the sort of. We've got nothing visually really to compare with the experience with, or within a senses to compare it. And everything about the subject, everything about what you're trying to put together, Chris, with these documentaries, Elusive, and the Reptilians. I lost the thread there with the name of it. Sorry, guys, but it's so hard for you to put this subject across to mainstream, because the people involved in it, the actual experiences, unless they're absolutely experts and got 100% knowledge, which I don't know any experts out there that have, they don't know what they're actually dealing with either, and it's such a struggle to explain it.
Yeah, I guess out there, I know for a fact that in the medical community alone, certainly the psychiatric movement, if you want to call it that, they're aware that something's going on. For my money, I'm almost certain that they're aware that something is going on. And if you look at cases like Ted Bundy, for example, if you read about Ted Bundy, he as a child described this scaly creature coming out of his closet as a kid, and these voices in his head, and and that's just one serial killer out of probably about maybe around half a dozen that James Bartley has done a lot of work and research into. There are a lot of these serial killers who are saying exactly the same thing about these entities that would come in the room. You might say that they're just making that up as an excuse, the sort of. Yeah.
but why would they do that, Chris?
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I see these are trained psychologists that have done these studies on these individuals, and these are the guys that are trained to do that, and these are the guys that are trained to sort of find out what the inner workings of these people's minds. And it just so happens that if we've got, say, half a dozen of these guys that are saying exactly the same thing, there is somewhat of a correlation there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think, again, certainly in terms of publicly, that information would just be swept under the carpet, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is your show, Chris, so I'm not going to dwell on my experiences too much, but I've said it on various radio shows in past, so I'm not just saying something new today. For me, out of all the experiences that I ever had from childhood, the voices were the most terrifying out of everything. If I had the chance not to relive one of them again, it would be the voices. I can't even begin to explain the fear. So if anybody who's had to hear these voices for real, and it's not something that's just been made up inside a person's head, it must be one of the most traumatic things to carry that through life. Thank God I don't hear out like that now, but I did as a child.
Yeah, well, a lot of it, when people say they're hearing voices in the head, I guess I was the same as most people think that they're hearing this strange voice, and it's always a strange voice, but in a lot of these cases it's not that at all. It's their own voice, and it seems to be what is disguised as their own thoughts. And apparently it's very difficult, you can learn to discern certain thoughts that are not necessarily your own. I don't know whether I've ever experienced something like that. I guess it never came on my radar to think about stuff like that until I started don't mention the reptilians, but since researching it and speaking to a lot of people that have spent their life researching it, there seems to be definitely something in that they do have various ways, and not just negative. As I say, you get a lot of people that, I don't know, they class them, they might double them as fairies or angels or positive beings that step into their lives and save them and tell them, maybe not to drive down a certain street or whatever that might be. But it just rings true, especially when you speak to some of these people that worked in that field, in the psychiatric field, that talk about this stuff. So I think there's something in it. Is there enough evidence at the moment to correlate together? No, I don't think so. Not at least publicly, but I think it's being done on the quiet.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely riveting, to be honest, Chris Evers. I think this is
absolutely
great stuff. Now,
absolutely. Can I just before we move on there, Paul? I just wanted to ask Chris. We've spoken quite a bit about the negative influence of the reptilians, etc., etc. What about benevolent experiences? Are there any of those, Chris?
I think in regards to benevolent experiences, a lot of this seems to tie back to the lack of, I guess you might call it, the lack of sort of fear and trauma. So I think the minute something doesn't entail fear and trauma, it becomes a positive experience, doesn't it? Because there's no negative vibe there at all. So I think, for the most part, what I'm getting from the benevolent ETs is that this tends to be somewhat of a family connection, again, a soul connection with these beings, and the source, whatever that might be, where these beings come from, whether they've had so many incarnations here and on various planes of existence and on various planets. But again, as someone that's never experienced anything like that at all, in any, not that I'm aware of, it's very difficult to sort of investigate that and get a feel for it without going into Wonderland and being more sensational, if you like. But I like Mary Rodwell. I think she's done, she's a great researcher. She's done a lot of work with children. That is the interesting side of Mary's works. Where, when you're working with adults, I think there's always that, rightly or wrongly, there's always that sort of distrust there, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
We're with children, and there's certain things that have happened in her research where one child's written in an ET language, and another child, 3,000 miles away, has been able to read this language. That is, it's fantastic. It's amazing, really. Yes, but again, there's always that guy that thinks that it's a set-up and that's Mary's making this all up, or the kid, it's bizarre, isn't it? They'll find any way to rubbish anything.
Why would children of the ages that Mary has spoken to, and I have spoken to Mary about this, where, why would children of the ages of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old make all that up?
Exactly.
What are they going to gain from making that up?
Yeah,
absolutely nothing.
Nothing, and they don't have the life experience either to create these small events. They're actually, I believe that in many cases the younger ones have actually experienced and are describing as best they can what has actually happened in real life events.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know you had some more questions and some other things you wanted to bring up, Paul. Should we move on a little bit from the reptilians now?
Yeah, well,
we've done well with that. We've covered that for about an hour and 10 minutes, so that's been I've actually quite enjoyed that, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think you went on a bit.
No, it's absolutely fine.
I'll have to edit some of that out, Chris, I think.
Chris, you were learning, both of us, to be honest with you. I have no great knowledge on the reptilians, and it was fabulous, but one thing what I want to talk about next is Elusive, and I've got a small sort of part and a little
here we
bit
go. Here we go. Plugging himself, folks. He's plugging himself.
But no, I've loads of faith in it. Not just because of that. I've loads of faith in this. It looks any listeners out there, get onto YouTube, look at the trailers that Chris has put together for Elusive.
Well, I was actually, can I interrupt you there, Paul? I was actually just going to mention that I saw one of the trailers earlier today. Is it you and Chris, Paul, sat on the cliff tops there at Bempton, looking out over the sea? That absolutely brilliant. And of course, a friend of ours, Andy Ramsden, is in that trailer that I saw as well. So, folks, if you get chance, and if Chris gets this out as soon as possible, watch it. Fantastic from what I've seen.
I think it's going to be good, and to me, I think it's probably a little bit more mainstream, if that's the word, Chris. How do you see Elusive coming across?
Yeah, I think obviously it's still in the taboo arena, if you like. It seems to be. I don't know why I do it to myself, but I think Elusive. Coming out of the reptilian stuff, Elusive was an opportunity to step away from what can be a very negative area of research. And I think there's only certain individuals that can commit themselves to looking at that stuff. It takes, a strong-willed person to be able to do that. So Elusive was great. It was like a breath of fresh air, literally, because you were getting out in the countryside. I don't actually, if I look back and try to think of the origin of Elusive and how it came about, I couldn't tell you. And these things sort of happen to me. It's, something just comes along, and the next thing I know, I'm making this film, and a 3-month project turned into 2 years. So,
were you more convinced as you got into the film, Chris, that these things, these creatures that people are describing and their experiences were real, or did you go into it thinking, yeah, there's something to this? I really believe there is, or have you become more entrenched and convinced that this phenomena of the alleged dogman, werewolf type entity, Bigfoot, that they're actually a real, we'll call it a living, breathing thing, but because they probably are at some stages when people are actually perceiving them. But my take on it, I don't actually think that we've got the landmass to support such a creature. But as I've said before, I contradict myself because I still believe it's real.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, and I think the process of making Elusive and the process of becoming a member of the BBR, the British Bigfoot Research Team, it's, you know, there's a warning there for any newbies out there that want to get into this, because I fell in it, that there are certain pitfalls that you've got to be wary of, and the first one is you can get overwhelmed with the information. You can get overwhelmed with what is dubbed evidence that's out there. And I guess let's bring up the stick structures that these creatures allegedly leave in the woods. So a lot of this research comes from America and Canada, and some of it from Russia, obviously, with the Yeti. And these creatures allegedly build certain structures, TP structures, and ground sticks stuck in the ground, and certain figurations of made with twigs. But when I first got into it, I did get overwhelmed, thinking that every stick and every structure that I found that nature had made, I was identifying as Bigfoot.
Yeah, but Chris, I'm just going to interrupt you there. Sorry about that. Don't we all do that? If people see UFOs in the sky, every single light that they've seen flying round in the sky after that becomes a UFO that's coming to take us away.
Yeah,
when in reality, it's the local jet coming into the local airport. We all do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right, Chris. But at the same time, I should have seen that. With the experience from Dimension, I should have seen that coming, really, and I didn't. And now I look back at it, and I guess you could call it a learning curve. It's probably something that you do have to go through. You do become more skeptical. I think making the film has made me become more skeptical anyway, because in the cryptid movement, just like the ufology movement, there is a hell of a lot of skeptics that are just out to cause trouble. But what I learned to do with the skeptics is I sort of turned it on its head and used it as a positive, because those guys were raising a lot of good points. As Paul said, the stick structures for me, I still to this day cannot credit it to anything out in the woods other than nature, because we don't see what's doing it, and the only time we can ever put it down to one of these creatures is if someone sees a creature doing it and films it. Other than that, there's just no way of knowing, because we get a lot of poachers and a lot of travellers from the travel community that use, mediums in the wood to leave messages for the next guy or for the next. Again, the bushcraft movement's growing as well, and then you've got just kids playing out in the wood. I know as a kid, when I was playing out in the wood, if I was sat talking to a friend, you just pick a stick up, don't you, and you twist it and bend it and you throw it on the ground afterwards and you go. And I think a lot of the new researchers sort of get a little bit overwhelmed with the evidence, but as you say, Chris, I think it's something that they have to go through to become a better researcher, and be a bit more discerning about what it is they're seeing.
Yeah.
Chris,
so yeah.
Have you got any views on why certain areas seem to produce more of this phenomena, or more of the Bigfoot Dogman related sightings?
Well, I think it comes down to, for my money, it comes down. I don't think there's just one factor. I think that's part of where I was going wrong in the beginning. I was looking at the American and Canadian research, thinking, okay, these guys have been doing this 60 years. It's got to be, and they're no nearer. They're no nearer to finding this thing. There has to be something. Someone's missed something. I'm going to turn a stone over one day, and the answer's going to be there. I'm going to be the guy that's going to find this, because I'm out all the time. 3 days a week, I'm out there. I'm in every corner of Britain. I will find it, and that's just ludicrous, because, how weird would it look if the guy making the documentary about the creature that allegedly doesn't exist films one and finds the evidence?
That would be interesting.
It's just going to be a Todd Standing too. Todd Standing's the guy that's they allege hoaxed his film, these videos of the 4 Sasquatch that he's filmed over in Canada, and I'd become that guy in Britain. So it's a bit of it's a double-edged blade, isn't it? You sort of want to find the evidence,
and you're frightened if you did find it, yeah.
Yeah, but you're frightened if you did, and I think, like you said, Paul, finding the key to what it is about these certain locations, I think it's going to be a lot of factors in there. that we don't understand yet. And I think, like we've discussed this about the ley lines, I think that's involved. I think there are other natural phenomena that's involved, and then there's other phenomena that we don't know. And maybe it's an individual thing. I don't know whether anyone's ever spoken about that, whether it's certain individuals that attract this stuff. You know, I know we're getting into sort of quantum realms there, aren't we, with this stuff?
I've thought that myself, Chris, and I've thought that about jumping from the Elusive, but jumping to the lights over the sea and the lights over the walls. That I've thought that certain individuals could evoke that kind of thing, and maybe moods could evoke that kind of thing. So it could be no different. And like you said, we're getting into realms of fantasy, maybe. I don't know, but
no, I don't think so. I don't think it's fantasy. I think I know what I try and do, and I know you certainly try and do that yourself, is sort of say it as it is, and that's all we can do, is say it as it is. And I think for the most part the witnesses do say it as it is. They will tell you, I don't know what the hell I've just seen. And I think a lot of the time where the skeptics come on board and say, well, you know, this is a case of mistaken identity, for example, that doesn't really stand up in Britain. You know, to see a werewolf, you know, 7 foot, standing onto a bipedal werewolf, chasing the car down the road or crossing the road or whatever, you know, there were 2 of them, you know, there was a small one with it and it was just crossing the road. You know, people tend to say what they see, don't they, for the most part. And you can sort of tell when you're interviewing someone and speaking to someone. Sometimes it is the fine detail, the mundane things that they throw into a description of what they've seen and what they've been doing that day, and how they describe the event unfolding. So mistaken identity doesn't fit here with the skeptics. So then you're left with, okay, you made it up. And there's just nothing. All right, I think there will be a portion of any supernatural, we'll call it, events, be it aliens or anything cryptid or anything just strange like ghosts, for example. There are a portion of those events that will be hoaxes or will be made up. We all know that. It's just the way it is. How much of that, you know, how large of a portion of those will be made up, I don't know. But I suspect that in Britain, the cryptid sightings, only a very small portion will be made up.
Yeah, and the fact, Chris, no, it's okay, mate. I'm butting in here. And the fact that we've got nothing to compare in our country. We don't have bears, do we? We don't have big cats, or we don't have anything really that we can compare with the descriptions of these creatures that people are coming up with here in the UK. Flickster, Cannock Chase. I mean, you've been to all these places, Chris. And are you hearing that's the thing, Chris. Are you hearing a similar description for the creatures?
Yeah, they're always. I mean, for the most part, I would say it's probably more 80% Sasquatch, Bigfoot, woodwolves type creatures, the wild man in the woods.
Yeah.
As opposed to 20% the dogman. I mean, a lot of people think that the werewolf, Andy McGrath has dubbed it. You know, it's been renamed the dogman. You know, the werewolf. But as far as I'm concerned, the werewolf is a man that transforms into a wolf, and it's always been that here in Britain. So I don't think that's happening, but we can never know, can we?
Well, I wouldn't think it was either myself, but if we are these people lying, which is what you touched on earlier, are some of them could be, but a lot of them, and the cases that I've researched and the ones that you've researched, I suppose, you've got to actually really dig hard to get the information out of these individuals. It don't just flow from their lips. So I don't understand what anybody's got to gain by hoaxing such a thing that they don't want to talk about. I think they're having a real experience. These things are real. It's just the real.
Here's an interesting thing to look at. The CFZ, or the Centre for Fortean Zoology, those are the guys that have been allegedly looking at this stuff for a long time. It's headed by John Downs. I don't know whether you know John Downs down in...
Yeah, I do know John. Yeah, I used to interact with him back in the 1990s, swap magazines and so on. So is he still actually active then?
Yeah, well, I think he's quite disabled now.
Right, okay.
Sort of injured. I don't think he gets out in the field much these days now. But there are other... I think that has branched out and it's built its own sort of group of researchers. I don't know how many there are exactly. But back in the day when these events were first being reported, the CFC turned a lot of these people away and didn't want the accounts. They didn't know how to label it, and they just said, basically, you're making it up, we don't believe you, to some of these guys that were approaching them. That's the information that I've been given. Whether that's true, I don't know, but I've been told by the witnesses that that's what happened. Hence, this small group of people, British researchers, some of them witnesses, started the British Bigfoot map, which started years and years ago. I mean, Deborah Hatswell, that is sort of heading that now, has been documenting this for 30 years. She started on an old map that was pinned on the wall, and she started, the old coloured pins that used to pin on the wall. She used to do it, but obviously as modern technology's changed, she's able to map that, and she's been able to map it on Google Maps. So if you go on the internet now and you type in British Bigfoot map, you'll see that there's a map on there with all the cryptid sightings over the last, some of them stretch back over 100 years, some of these sightings. Now again, they're difficult ones to sort of, attain the truth at, and they're often the ones that are sometimes contain a little bit mythology, but that happens with any tale, doesn't it? I guess,
Certainly does, yeah.
So we can't throw that up as, as a reason to not look at it.
Chris, what we're talking about now in 200 years' time, if the world's still here, will be looked upon as some kind of modern folklore.
Sure.
Somebody might have cracked it and got the answers to what these things are and what the nature of what the reptilians are, but if they haven't, there will still be people start scratching their heads and kicking ideas around like we're doing right now.
Yeah, I think at that time, I find it that, with it being CFC, with it being 14, obviously 14 means supernatural, so they don't believe in the British Bigfoot at all. They sort of believe in its existence, but they believe it's supernatural, but yet you can't find any of the research that they've allegedly done, which I have a problem with, because what's happening currently at the moment, these guys, where we should be helping each other and sort of discussing this stuff, some of that group, not all, some of that group don't want to look at the British Bigfoot, or indeed any cryptid found in Britain. There's no research gone into it. I think they have recently started a group that's going to look into it, but in one breath they're saying it doesn't exist and these people are making it up, but at the same time these are a group that look at supernatural things. So I find it really hard to know why they're not documenting this stuff, and then anyone that is documenting it, it's being criticised. It just doesn't help us understand this stuff. And again, I think it's this sort of division, and it's not all of them, there's only a handful of researchers that are sort of, this division is not helping, and I think in some cases, not necessarily in the cryptid community, I think in the ET community, I think there are agents working to misinform and disinform. In the cryptid community here in this country, I don't think that's happening just yet. But what I do know is that when I and other members of the team have submitted freedom of information requests about cryptids, they have sort of either been understaffed or they've gone out of the way to sort of not divulge the information that they're obliged to, which leads me to question, what is actually going on. Because my understanding is I look at it the same way that I look at the ET phenomena, and I look at the ET phenomena, I look at the whistleblowers, and I look at the military involvement, and I see all that with the cryptid stuff. And I see all that, like you said, Paul, put Benson with the lights. And this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time, that all the military are involved in observing or seem to be monitoring this phenomena. So I think they know what this phenomena is, and I think they know how it's generated and what, how it comes about. They seem to be able to monitor it or track it. How they're doing that, I don't know. But they're certainly investing a lot of money and time in doing it. And I think the fact... Yeah, sorry, mate, go on.
No, so do you think the feet on the ground know, as in the military feet on the ground, or do you think the powers above who are sending the guys out to monitor are the ones that actually know?
Well, yeah, I think you're probably right. I think as in ufology, a lot of this is compartmentalised. The military is traditionally compartmentalised anyway, need to know and all that sort of stuff. And I think, yeah, if that was my organisation, I'd be doing exactly the same thing. I wouldn't be I'd be giving them a job to do, and I wouldn't be telling them why they do it. It makes sense if you're going to keep secrets. And I think the idea that skeptics think that there's no secrecy and there's no conspiracy for the truth, there's no embargo on the truth, it's nonsense. It's ludicrous that is still being thrown about, certainly about ufology, and I don't see why it would be any different in cryptids.
Chris, you're spot on. It's like the subject of ufology. I mean, how many times have we heard that this subject and these things that are allegedly in our atmosphere are of no defence significance? Then we find out that there's been immense defence significance.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, if they can lie to us from 1969, for example, the American Department of Defence, Project Blue Book, yeah, we're not interested, there's nothing behind it. Lo and behold, December the 16th, 17th last year, they admit they've still been investigating them to at least 2012. Yeah, they're lying to us all, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we need to get past, a lot of these skeptics need to get their heads around the fact they sort of think that they're deserved of the truth. They sort of think that they're special and that we've got some right to the truth, and that is just not the case at all. And
the only thing you have in life, Chris, that is you have a right to, is to pay tax and drop down dead. And that's about it.
Exactly.
What I did want to ask you, Chris, it is talking about Britain and the cryptids, field in Britain. What is the most popular sighting? What is it that we see the most of? Sorry to interrupt. If you want to finish your last point.
No, you're right. It's cool. No, 80% or around 80%, looking at the map, are the British Bigfoot, or what in mythology they'd like to call it mythology, but in British history it's been called numerous names, but it's known as the Woodworth as well. And this is like the Green Man. You see this sort of thing on the church. A lot of churches still have the Green Men, outside. You can see the face peeping out of the leaves, and for the most part, the skeptics would like us to believe that that's just nature. It's just the man of nature. It just represents nature, and that's just the way it is. But that's not true at all. And again, that could be a documentary in itself, the actual history of Britain. But the problem with the British Bigfoot, one of the skeptics' issues with it, again, there's a lot of issues that they have with it, but is that historic thing. And I keep saying over and over, they keep asking for historic accounts of the Woodworths, and which are out there. It's a bit like, as we use terminology, and the terminology for a phenomena changes over time. I think that's what's happened with this. But for the most part, they don't seem to want to acknowledge that a lot of British history in particular has been lost. We know very little actually about our origins and about our history. Archaeologically we know quite a bit, but beyond that we know nothing. And that information was literally burned. When the religious factions came in and some of the monarchs, anything that didn't fit with that ideology of the time was gotten rid of permanently. There was no internet back then, no Google Drive back then. This was lost and gone, and that's it. That's the end of it.
Yeah.
And I guess you could get into, I guess that goes for the witch trials and all that kind of stuff. It all solidifies what I'm saying about the amount of history that is lost is vast amounts of history that did not fit the agenda at the time and didn't sit nicely with what they wanted people to think. Because as of now, Chris, it's exactly the same now. Our beliefs are guided and shaped by the powers that be. It's only a few, even the alternative media, a lot of that stuff is misinformation. We're being shaped and culture is shaped. So, there's no real difference in the fact that people are saying that they're seeing these Bigfoot. Again, there's no misidentification. Some of these sightings are from children. Some of them are multiple witnesses as well, which is important. What do you do with something like that? It's other than take it for what it is. Particularly, I think Deborah Hatswell's interview when I met her, and you can watch that interview on my YouTube channel where she breaks down. I had to use it. Can I use that clip? Because she was just breaking her heart. You could actually see her reliving that encounter that she had when she was 15 with this creature. And that was real. It was at that point I knew there was something more to this. Whether or not I could find any evidence or not, I knew just off that encounter. And then I met more and more and more people that that had seen this thing, whatever it is. So yeah,
have you had any reports of people being injured or by these creatures?
Well, I know you came up with other than the recent account that you came up with a guy that contacted you from Australia, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
That said that he was camping out with his friends and this creature, they'd all nodded off. It was about 2 a.m., was it? And then all of a sudden all hell broke loose and he awoke to find his friend being hung off the floor by his calf muscle. This thing got hold of his calf and he was holding him off the ground, still in his sleeping bag. And
3 foot off the ground.
Yeah.
A 6 foot man held 3 foot off the ground. And this guy, who now lives in Australia, used to live in Sheffield, England. I mean, you've got the story, Chris. I mean, you'll finish it, but it was Warncliffe Woods, if any listeners are familiar with Warncliffe Woods, because what was interesting is Deborah, with a Bigfoot map, and I had no knowledge of this, says she's got, I think she said 8 reports of such creatures in Warncliffe Woods. I'd love to find more.
Well, exactly, and those are the sort of correlations that you're looking for, aren't there? Someone like yourself that's not directly connected in any way, shape or form to the Bigfoot world, I guess you could say. Certainly the British Bigfoot anyway, that is contacted by a guy through reading Truth Proof, and all of a sudden you've got this correlation, and the map is actually quite full of accounts like that. It's just that these skeptics don't take the time to investigate. It's like you said, Paul, it's lazy research. They don't really want to. They've already made their mind up. You can't research something in 10 minutes on the internet. It's ridiculous.
And they won't do a U-turn. They won't do a U-turn on their belief system either. It's almost as though my mind's made up, I won't change it. Whereas you've just said, my take on certain things when I've been doing these documentaries has actually changed as the documentaries evolved. And I'm sure your belief system, Chris Evers, has done a similar thing at times. Mine has.
Oh yes, it has, most definitely. I think, as me and you have discussed before, Paul, and I think I've made clear on the show, I do tend to be a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit nuts and bolts UFO sightings, but I am beginning to slowly, and it is very slowly, change my opinion as to what these are. I can't say exactly now what they are, but I'm beginning to look at the ILF type of sightings a little bit more, to be quite honest with you, Paul.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And the intelligent light forms. I mean, that was the old reason for naming the old website that, because it's a light, but there's some kind of awareness, there's some kind of intelligence to it. And jumping back to the orb of light that you saw, Chris, the yellow orb when you were making the documentary. You don't know the reasons behind seeing it, but there will have been a reason. And I don't know if we asked, did you think it was under intelligent control, or was it just that brief that you're not sure?
Yeah, it was just over in a second. It was a second, and then it flashed back on for less than a second. It flashed up again, and that was it. It was actually a whole lot of nothing, if I'm honest. And that's why I didn't read anything into it.
Something though, Christine, it's confirmation of something, some subtle confirmation that maybe we're not picking up on, but I think so. I mean, no great coincidence or that you happen to see that while you're making this highly unusual, highly controversial documentary. Super.
It's possible, I guess. I would like a little bit more confirmation next time, guys. If you're out there, I just think, and the same can be said for the cryptid thing. I think, and I am starting to believe a little bit more about what you're projecting out and how you're going about things, because I have found that when I'm in certain moods and I'm thinking certain thoughts, things do run smooth for me in certain. I don't know whether that makes sense. I'm not trying to get sort of fantastical with this. I just mean on a very simple...
No, you're just getting spooky now, Chris. Yeah. That's not the kind of stuff we talk about on here.
I'll tone it down a bit. No, but I'm just thinking, do you know what I'm saying? Maybe it's just a positive, when you're in that positive mode and you're thinking, and you're wanting certain things to happen. And synchronicity, I think that is a real thing. I think that ties into a lot of this. And I think when you do something, I think if we are on a certain path, for example, I think sometimes it can pay to step off that path, which is what I've done with Elusive at times. And when I've done that, I've sort of destabilised my path, if you like, and then other strange things happen because I've sort of made it happen, if that makes sense. I don't know whether I'm making sense or not, but yeah, and I guess you could call that some form of synchronicity. I don't know, but with even the skeptical sort of debates that I've had, and I've had a lot of them, I can tell you, that even shapes you as well in a strange sort of way, and it forces you into areas that you don't want to go down. It forces you to accept things that you don't want to look at, and that's really important as a researcher. And I think it made me it almost let me make a list of things that pros and cons for the existence of these cryptids, and I sort of went down the list. And you start with the simple ones, don't you? The ones related to a corporeal creature like food, for example, because that was a big, I was being hit with a stick, the science stick. Oh, well, there's not enough food. There's no breeding population. What are they going to eat? So I sort of ended up doing vlogs about and blogs about writing about how much food there is available in Britain. And by the end of that investigation, that argument was just squashed and thrown right out of the window, and they sort of accepted it when I presented them with the figures of available protein sources in the UK. 34 million sheep, for example, 2 million deer, 20 million rabbits. I mean, the list is listed therefore that there's just so much food that theory about them not being able to eat is gone. So the next one, I think, what was the next one? Was the breeding population. And again, if we don't know anything about this creature, how can we presume to know how many of them there needs to be to sustain a breeding population? Do you know what I'm saying by that? And I guess you could tie that into the skeleton and fossil argument as well. Well, wait a minute. If we don't know how many there are, how can we find it odd that we're not finding the skeleton? Because maybe there just aren't that many, and the conditions to find a fossil or a skeleton of any creature is very difficult. There's certain conditions that are required to leave that evidence. There's all that kind of thing. So because we've not got the full picture, any argument against it can sort of be countered, which they don't like at all. But those are the facts. You might not like it, but these are the sort of arguments that I've been forced to research into and at least come back with some counter that I'm happy with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So where are you now then, Chris, with Elusive? I mean, I think did you start this in 2016 as well? And when's it going to be released is what we want to know.
Well, it should be released. I've done a lot of wild camping, so because part of this was getting over the fact that, as Paul does, he's getting out in the woods on your own at night. And that's a really, if you've never done that before, your mind obviously just plays tricks on you, doesn't it? It's sort of, you can get yourself into very tricky situations being in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, on your own. Because
it's like I said earlier, Chris, isn't it? It's like every night light that you see flying around in the sky becomes a UFO, and I can imagine the leaves rustling in a woods in the middle of September, October, November time is something coming to get you.
Oh, absolutely! It was terrible. It got to the point where I think there was about probably 6 occasions where I didn't stay at all. I would get there late, because it made sense to get there when human activity had ceased, or possible human activity, because some of these places were quite remote as well. So I wanted to eliminate all those, the natural causes, humans being one of them. So you set your stall up, you set the tent up, you're there about 11 o'clock, and in the summer months, obviously it's coming light at sort of like 4 a.m, even earlier in some cases. The birds are awake at 3 a.m. So the investigation would only be like 4 or 5 hours. So there was no real need then. I would talk myself out as well. There's no need to stay. Let's just get off. Let's go home now. The sun's come up. It's time to go home. Bigfoot's not here. That's what sort of happens. But you learn the more you're in the woods, and you do get used to the surroundings. It's still scary. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care how big of a man you are. You do it, and then come back to me and say it's not scary, because it is. Yeah. It's just it's totally unnatural. It should be natural to us to be out there alone. It should be. It's just that the minute you turn the lights off, it's suddenly not that natural at all. And that's when you realise. Sorry, I've just finished this.
No, it's fine.
How poor your eyesight is as well. People talk about, well, why are we not seeing them? You come away from the city, it's pitch black. You're not seeing anything. Unless there's a full moon, which gives you that little bit of ground light. Other than that, there's just nothing, is there? You're not going to see a thing. And in the woods at night, it's weird because you've got this spotlight, you've got your headlamp on or your torch, or you might have a fire going. You realise, well, I'm sort of a beacon here. Well, I really need to turn this off, because the whole idea of being here is to sort of
to catch them, not catch you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's again another beginner's mistake, that you learn that these creatures, if they're indeed out there, they knew I were there long before I'd even unpacked my bag and got the camera out. It's crazy to think that we're going to walk into this predator's environment. I say predator because it has to be, as far as I'm concerned, an apex predator to be out there surviving. If it is, it doesn't really matter. There's this flesh and blood argument, is there? Is it flesh and blood? Is it supernatural? It can be both. I've accepted, and I'm quite happy to accept that it can be both. Why can't it? We're talking about a creature no one can find here. So, isn't it? And this is why I have no problem with the CFC. Sort of, they label it zoo form, and we just label it Bigfoot. We try not to label it because we don't know what we're dealing with. So the minute you stick a label on something, you're making your job hard, because what you try and do then is you make your information and your findings fit the level given it, and you can't do that.
That's why they won't do a U-turn, and these people, they're not talking like you're talking today, Chris, and saying that your views and your ideas are actually evolving with the more information you're being found and being presented to you. And I think it's the only way we can look at this subject, or any subject involving the paranormal.
Well, it's a massive task. I think in ufology, there are literally in this country thousands of researchers out there. But when you look at the cryptid community, it's very tiny. It's in its infancy, and there's this huge sort of backlash from the skeptic community saying that this doesn't exist and you've no evidence. And of course we've not, because it's brand new. You don't. They even say the same about Bigfoot in Canada and America. Now there's a whole load of anecdotal evidence. There's prints, tracks, photos, video. There's just no end of evidence. There's certainly witness testimony as well. But we haven't had the ability, and we haven't got the resources currently in this country to. I think the good thing about the Canadian and American stuff is we can use it as a template and say, all right, what do we do? What do we want to do different? And one of my things at the top of my list, I actually did a video blog on the channel to say, I don't want any backbiting in this movement. And that's how naive I was back then, to think that there wasn't going to be any backbiting in the British cryptid community. It's full of it, and it just hinders the research. And rather than, we should be mucking together and debating these things and trying to, come to a conclusion, we're just not doing that. And sometimes I bite. I'm only a human. Sometimes I do bite and get into debates online, but I try to learn from it. If someone's making a point, I'll go out of my way to sort of counter it. And if I can't counter it, even if I don't admit it publicly, I've admitted it to myself, and that will come over in the film. And I'll say so. I'll say I can't present the thing that I've done with this. I was talking about stick structures. That's branded as sort of strong evidence, but it can't be. I can't accept it, and I'm not willing to be. There's no pressure for me from my friends and the other researchers to accept it and put it in the film and say that it's real. There's no pressure from them. They don't care. They're happy that I'm just saying it as it is, and I can't accept that as evidence at the moment, because we're 2 years in. 60 years down the line, I might say, yeah, and I know, maybe it is evidence, and I know that there are individuals in the BVR that are specifically researching certain stick structures that that I've not got the time to do it, and they have. So when their study's complete in 2 or 3 years, then let's have a look at it. You know, that's the way that this research should be done, and we should be given ample time to do it. They should, you know. So I guess in some respects, the skeptics are always going to win, aren't they? Whether it be, whatever it might be, anything alternative, you know, they're always going to win, and it's a matter of not being too passionate. You know, I do find myself getting really passionate because this is my film, and this is going to, the idea of it is to help the witnesses, and the idea of it is to bring people out of the woodwork, like Paul's book, and Chris, probably your magazine has done the same. It brings people forward and helps them, and maybe brings people that wouldn't speak out of the woodwork.
Yeah, absolutely. What you've got to remember, though, Chris, is that skeptics have to be right every single time. We only have to be right once.
Well, there is that, you know, but we at the moment we're having a difficult time being right the once. At least from my perspective, because I guess sometimes I need to take the filmmaker's hat off, don't I? Because you do get there is a little bit of pressure to sort of present this, and I will say that I have bent a little bit in regards to evidence that I deemed, you know, relatively strong, that I won't put in the film now, because I don't want to give ammunition where it's not necessary. I think it would be a mistake to do that. I think that the correct thing to do is, like I said, correlate and build the data over a few years and then present it, and then let's have the debate then, not present it in its weakest form and then potentially put off anyone that wants to continue that research off doing it because for fear of being ridiculed or, you know, just laughed at or scoffed at or, you know, at all that, you know. Yeah.
So, because we're actually beginning to run out of time now, we've got less than 10 minutes left now. Do you have any plans in the pipeline for after Elusive? And tell us a little bit about yourself, Chris. You know, I know you live in Bolton, but are you a married man? You got any kids or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm married. I've got a 21-year-old lad and a 6-year-old girl. My lad's not into any of this sort of stuff, as typically, doesn't it? It always happens, your partners and your family. They're never into it, are they? It never works that way. My wife's quite into it. She's very patient with me. This has been going on a long time, and a lot of money has gone into this. We've lost lots of money. I say lost. You know, that's the wrong way to look at it. It's an investment, really, and I'm happy. I think that if I'm happy, she's happy. As long as it's not costing the earth, and it's, you know, a few £1,000s over the year, she's quite happy to do that, because, you know, in life, people waste a lot. They have different perspectives on where money should go and where it shouldn't go. As long as you're happy, you can spend your money however you like, as long as it's lit.
Yeah. My wife's actually an astrologer, Chris, so she's actually quite supportive of what I do, as I know Mary is with Paul. But, you know, when we get a partner that's like that with us, you know, you want to hold on to them and never let them go, because behind every good man, there's a better woman. And I use the term better on purpose there, of course.
No, I agree, Chris. I think you're right, mate. I think I would agree with that. Certainly in market circumstance, I would agree with that, because you wouldn't be able to get without that patience and without the flexibility, we would never get anything done. I wouldn't be able to commit to the hours that I've put into this. There's just no way. I mean, I'm actually surprised I still do get away with that and going camping, you know, on a jolly, you know, in the woods. It's crazy that I'm allowed to do that.
I'm sorry, I'm just imagining how jolly it would be if you actually did see something, Chris.
Well, no, I mean, the last few excursions have been, and it makes sense, you know, this is another thing. I think I wanted to do the whole, I don't know whether you're familiar with Les Stroud.
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah, Les Stroud, Survivor Man. He did a whole series on the Bigfoot, and this guy goes into real remote areas, you know, in Canada and in America, real in the wilds on his own, and it was that type of sort of feel that I wanted to put into it. But at the same time, I realised that if I ever did witness anything or see something and I didn't happen to catch it on camera, which you're never going to do, or capture it on the audio devices and the trail cams that never capture anything, at least I would have a second witness. And it's always, when you're making these films as well, it's so difficult. You know, I never had to do that with a Reptilian documentary, because it wasn't about me. Whereas with Elusive, I am fronting it. So I've got to sort of, and Paul will tell you that presenting this stuff is difficult. You know, you've got to get it all off in one take, and you're trying to do it on your own out in the woods, and the wind's blowing. It's a pain. It's a bit of a task really to get this stuff done out on your own. So having that second guy to either do the camera work or to say, Chris, that was terrible, do it again.
Yeah,
you know,
always comes in handy.
Chris,
Always comes in handy.
Before we end, how many locations have you actually visited whilst making Elusive?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. It
Yeah.
just shows the dedication, it shows the footwork, and this is what's needed. Elusive could not have been made just from, say, Bempton or from Cannock. You've had to visit these places to gauge and get a good opinion of what's out there, haven't you?
Yeah, I think you've got to tell the story, haven't you? You've got to. I mean, the map doesn't necessarily. The interesting thing about the map is the one thing that I found myself personally researching the map is that when I put the UK power grid over the Bigfoot map, there was a strong correlation with those power lines, the overhead and cables. And this, I guess, you could tie that into energy, can't you? You can tie it into the path of least resistance, because often where these power lines are, there's no resistance. These creatures can, if they're real, can cover significant ground without being hindered by woodland, that kind of stuff. And again, these, and I guess they work as modern day routes, if you like. But I also think that you can tie into the werewolf accounts as well, and the Bigfoot accounts are the same. Ancient routes and Roman roads and all that kind of things would be routes travelled if indeed they're corporeal. So I imagine that they would be using these routes. Now, again, there's a lot of different. I think personally, there's a lot of different elements to this that will give us the answer, if there is an answer. I don't know, but they'll give us some idea anyway, a stronger idea than we have now anyway. Let's put it that way.
What a
So I'll probably just go back. Sorry, Paul, go on.
No, I'm only boasting about you, Chris Turner. I'm so pleased that we've been able to interview you today. I don't know what time we've got left, Chris, but...
Well, we've got a few minutes, and it might be appropriate now to say to Chris, how can people contact you, Chris? Where's your YouTube channel? Give us as much information as you can.
Yeah, you can contact me. That's the main place that people get in touch with me on YouTube. So if you just put Chris Turner Bigfoot into YouTube, my channel will come up. I'm also a member, of the British Bigfoot group that's on Facebook, and I'm on Facebook if you can contact me on there. I'm the guy usually with a picture of some Bigfoot on his t-shirt or something like that. And my email, if you want to put my email on there, if someone's hearing this and they want to give one of their accounts, it's christurnervfx@gmail.com. I say it, and the VFX is because I should have said this in my introduction reel. I used to be a visual effects artist. That's how I got into filmmaking. I used to work in mainstream TV, and I worked on things like Doctor Who and Bedlam and Dracula and a lot of things from on mainstream telly. But I got into the weirder stuff just because it was more interesting. The pay sucks, but it's just more interesting. And sitting in an office doing visual effects for, the glamour of it wore off really quickly. But I think there's this sort of people have this idea that working on TV, films and programs is sort of exciting, and it is for about 2 months. But when you're getting home late at night and you're not seeing your family, that was enough to make me just quit from that area of work and go self-employed and freelance as an editor and a visual effects artist still to this day.
Well, I have every sympathy for you, Chris, because I've been a self-employed photographer for the last 5 years now, so I know exactly where you're coming from, and I know the difficulties that can actually be involved with doing that as well. So, Chris Turner, thank you for being our guest on the Out of Nowhere radio show, and believe me folks, this is one gentleman's work you really do need to see, and I've actually learned quite a lot. Thank you very much, Chris.
No, you're welcome. I've really enjoyed it, Chris. Thanks very much for having me on. Cheers, Paul. I appreciate you contacting me and coming on.
Yes, thank you.